let's start by saying and spelling your name for me.
Sure, it's Brian Trunzo, Briantrunzo.
And what do you do?
I am the Metaverse lead at Polygon Studios.
Oh. Oh. Yeah, I'm trying to get an interview with somebody from Polygon.
Well, you got one.
Do you represent all of Polygon or just the Metaverse portion?
So Polygon Studios is essentially the business function of Polygon, the protocol. So, the technology is the technology, Studios is the business unit they're under. So I represent Polygon Studios, but by virtue of doing that, we are sort of the client-facing operation of the protocol.
Got it. So we'll talk Metaverse.
Great.
Before I forget all the things that I really want to talk about, I'm going to start with a question I asked Kevin O'Leary a couple hours ago. And he really, this is one of them. That's a great question. You're absolutely right about that. So essentially you have 4 players, okay? We got Ethereum, we got you, we got Cardano, Solana. Do you think that, let's say the 3, because let's not even talk about Ethereum, that's a whole can of worms. But do you think that the platforms are going to have to become more specialized, more aimed towards what they believe is a problem they're solving, is their marketplace, is the direction that they want to feed an aspect of this industry versus trying to be utilitarian for everything, for everyone?
I think once the technology takes a point of view, it's no longer an open and permissionless protocol and sort of like forfeits the right to be either a settlement layer or an execution environment for blockchain and for this concept of like the open decentralized metaverse. I think being general purpose is necessary. That is how you create composable programs. That's how you create an ecosystem of culture Legos whereby one can snap into the ecosystem and add value to it. So I think at the point that a blockchain or something that resembles a blockchain, and that's a very deep topic we can go into, starts to become application specific, it kind of forfeits the right to sort of say that they are a harbinger of the open decentralized metaverse.
Is proof of stake more or less secure than proof of work?
So these are topics that I'm not really permission to speak on. I speak specifically on gaming, entertainment, media, brand. Yeah. So.
Is it possible I can get somebody from Polygon? You can hook me up with somebody else here today and tomorrow.
I'm the only person from Polygon here, so
Got it.
yeah. We in our hyper growth,
Where
we've
are you
become
guys based out of, by the way?
Everywhere. We don't have an office. Yeah.
So who is that person and where would they be located? I mean, I'll get in the car.
The founder's office would be the one who is speaking on proof of stake versus proof of work, and they're mostly in Dubai. So
Okay.
yeah.
Maybe I'm not knowing this.
Yeah.
It's okay. Charles keeps turning me down, and I've gone through 3 different people, but I know he's getting a message. So
Yeah.
I got to do what I got to do, right? But okay, so then you want to stick with gaming and metaverse?
Well, it's mostly gaming, metaverse, brand, consumer, things like that. Yeah.
Okay. How about regulation?
That's a tricky issue. It depends on what you ask. We have a compliance team and a chief legal officer.
So essentially, this is the Wild Wild West, and there's no sheriff, and we all know regulations are coming because the people with big dollars who want to get into this space aren't going to get in without regulation. So, a couple of things here. The next couple of questions. If you don't want to answer, just
Sure.
But do you believe there ought to be some sort of association for the industry or governing body? Think ICANN or think, the board of directors who picks which emojis, something that says this is what Web3 principle is, the principle, the philosophy. This is what it's supposed to be. And therefore, if regulation comes onto our industry, it better fucking have this, and this, because these are the principles it was based on. And I don't want Walmart and Apple computers and Facebook and the US senators duking it out to come up with some sort of regulation so big money can come in when it really ought to be based on the principles that the OGs have.
Yeah, I think the best way to address that is that we as an industry can do a better job about lobbying. Outside of Coin Center, I personally do not know of anyone who is actually on Capitol Hill lobbying for those community members who are actually innovating and have been here since the Ethereum white paper was written or before that, who are, true believers in a decentralized future. So I think that there's a game being played that Web3 purists may not necessarily be taking as seriously as they should. But I think there's moral hazard in trying to develop some sort of formal body that's supposed to represent something that's decentralized, open, permissionless. So I think there's some hazard there. So outside of well-intentioned people who self-organize on behalf of a greater good, I don't know that we have any business of actually formally developing some sort of lobby on behalf of the EVM, for instance. I think that that's not a part of the decentralized, open, permissionless playbook.
Great answer. Okay, so all this kind of started with this baseball card mentality. I buy this, something happens, I sell it and get rich. Then we went to, hey, this can help the starving artist, to be a better artist and stop worrying about the money and who's taking their share of the money. Then all of a sudden that concept moves on to small business. Are we moving to a level where a lot of the people in this are like, can we change the world? Can we make a better world here?
Yeah, I think that's latent to the technology, and I think the purists understand that. I think most people who find themselves embarking on a blockchain journey at one point in that journey realize that the technology could be used to make the world a better place. It's my hope that there's a great awakening around it. I don't know that there's a way to sort of like get that message seeded into the zeitgeist and sort of promote that message in a formal way. But I do believe that people who actually use the technology, oftentimes too many people who speak about the technology have never actually even used it. I'm often amazed by how many cognoscenti and sort of talking heads speak about the metaverse or blockchain and don't have a MetaMask or any sort of wallet or self-custodied assets. So there's this weird tension there that yes, I do agree that more people should open their eyes to how world-changing this technology is, but that in the popular culture, that message is sort of ignored largely. And I think we do it to ourselves, to be quite honest. There's a lot of toxic behavior in Web3, and it's very easy to lodge vitriol against it, right? Like when, your scammiest friend made a couple $1,000s flipping some useless assets and yaps your ear off about it nonstop, incessantly, it's very easy to say, like, I don't really trust this thing. I'm not really into it. So I think getting past that is important to the proliferation of blockchain and Web3 culture, and I think we will. And I think most people who actually use the technology and wrestle with it and learn it see that it can be used for good.
Okay, so you don't, based on what you're saying, believe there needs to be a sheriff, but should there be vigilante? If we all see something, should we shun them?
No.
Should we make it publicly known this is not acceptable behavior?
I think that comes down to individual agency and each one of us to sort of like use our best discretion and judgment. I don't think it's incumbent upon any one person to be a gatekeeper of what's acceptable or what's correct. And that's, again, the beauty of what's about blockchain being permissionless and open. And I think that at the social layer, we'll self-select what's appropriate and what's not. And there's a sort of like legal and compliance side of things. And, we say there's no sheriff, but there's lots of sheriffs. You can't you can't sort of like opt out of like legal systems no matter how hard you try. They exist. And sure, you could get away with it for a while, but it'll catch up to you over time. But on the social level, I think it comes down to human agency, right? Like if I find something to be distasteful, I opt out of it. I don't need to engage with it. So it comes down to the individual.
Yeah, but is that your level of responsibility? And you're saying a person. What I'm saying is, does the community itself have some level of responsibility to all kind of quietly go, shh, that's a bad actor?
No, because then you're inviting censorship. You're sort of like living long enough to become the villain, right? Like we don't like the censorship of social media platforms, so why should we invite censorship into Web3? Now, again, my point here is that it should be self-selecting, right? Like if you find something to be distasteful, you can opt out of it. No one's forcing you to engage with this stuff. And then alongside this are traditional systems of censorship and law that sort of governs the whole thing, right? So I think it's largely self-selecting and comes down to like your own personal agency.
So you get burned once or twice, you figure out what's up and move forward.
Yeah, essentially, you lick your wounds, and you do better to understand that there's a lot of peril out there, and it's sort of that go west, young man sort of meme, right? It's on your way out west. There's rattlesnakes in the weeds, and there's people trying to sell you snake oil and all sorts of weird stuff, and I think it really comes down to education, right? Like, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to not get burned or scammed or have a poor experience. Educating yourself doesn't necessarily mean that you won't, but it puts you in a better place. And I think that once we gear up to cross the chasm and we have a better UX and UI on the front end, we remove some of these awful frictions and we have better on-ramps, and Web3 becomes a technology layer that's just under the hood that works better than Web2 technologies, and people don't need to get hammered over the head that they're doing Web3 things. I think this conversation goes away over time because it'll just be a better experience, a better internet, and people will love to engage with it, and they won't even know they're engaging with it, and they won't have to. It's sort of like SMTP. You don't need to know what that is to send an email. It just works, and it's great, and you don't think about it.
Okay, so let's talk about digital wallets. I do a lot of parallels here. So you have iPhone, you have Android. Apple, I tell you everything, you're too stupid to fucking do anything. Galaxy, whatever, we do whatever you want to do, right? So is there a possibility, because I think a lot of people feel like wallets is a very, very lacking area. At least I hear that a lot. I'm a little new to the space. I first started investigating this about a year ago. I'm one of those people that I'm talking about it, and I haven't minted. I don't have a digital wallet. But I've been absorbing a lot of information. Okay, but you have inspired me too. I am going to go home and mint an NFT. I'm going to get a digital wallet. I'm not have to.
Great, my job is done.
Okay, but it seems to me that you have this custodial wallet, and it's complicated as fuck. So just let me deal with everything. But I just have to trust in you and everything. And then you have the non-custodial, and the various things give you some level of control, but it's still complicated and nothing is truly simple about it. So a lot of people are kind of saying it's an area in which something's going to have to change and get better before mass adoption. Do you think there could be this concept of a hybrid in between the two, where you're giving me some of the benefits and the security and the things that are too advanced for me, but you're allowing me some drop-down menus of choices I might want to make?
Yeah.
So it's semi-custodial.
So that exists. There are folks in the space who are innovating in a way that abstracts away the friction, the UI, UX friction of self-custody, which, to pause for a second and talk about self-custody, banks make a lot of money on fees because no one wants to touch their assets because there's great responsibility to watch over your money, right? And people seem to forget that. And, being a bank has been a great business model for hundreds of years because people don't want to hold custody because it's difficult to do. So start there. So, where we are now with self-custody is we're starting to realize that private keys, really watching over my money, that's hard. And there's a lot of responsibility. I have $1 million in the bank and I have control over it. That's kind of scary. So the frictions are somewhat justified in a purist way. But to answer your question about or your supposition that we need to get past this in a positive way, is that people are working on it, right? And over time, I'm of the belief that most of this will get abstracted away in a way that is not sort of against the values of Web3. So I point to people like Sequence, which is a wallet challenger to sort of the MetaMask monopoly, if you will. Sequence is a smart contract wallet launched by the team at Horizon Games. It's OAuth compliant, so if you have a Gmail, you could spin up a seed phrase and have a Sequence wallet. The user never interacts with his or her seed phrase. It's broken into 3, stored on 3 separate devices, and all you need is to prove your Gmail to actually log in and have your own self-custody, non-custodial wallet experience. And it's fantastic. It's not perfect, and they have their challenges, but it's as good a team as you'll find who are thinking about as good a user experience as they can integrate. And what's amazing about the team at Horizon, which owns Sequence, and they're not alone, there are other people doing this. I don't want this to seem like an infomercial for Sequence, but their biggest proof of concept is the Skyweaver game, which is their sister studio. It's a collectible card game, sort of like Magic the Gathering, that integrates Sequence in the browser and one can sort of like interact with Skyweaver and never really know that they have a sequence wallet. It's branded, you can see it's sequenced, but for an unsophisticated user or someone who's not really paying attention, it feels like a Web 2 experience. So that was a long-winded answer. I think over time, we will focus our energy at solving these things, and there are people who are currently doing it.
But a lot of great sound bites in that long-winded answer.
Thank you.
Right now, I just like to check and make sure. Okay. So,
I have like 2 minutes, sorry.
yeah, okay, so I'll get to a couple quick ones. What is Web 4?
It doesn't exist. I asked Jack Dorsey what Web 5 is. I mean, it's a meme. It's not real.
Okay. Best answer I got to that was teleportation. I'm laughing. But
Yeah.
I've had people go, oh, it's when AI is Web 3.
Sure, I mean, one could
no, it's a
hypothesize,
great,
sure.
You gave me the
Yeah.
answer. You gave me the answer. It doesn't exist. Great answer. Okay, so let's talk about the metaverse. What's the last time you had? I actually don't know a lot about it. I can't formulate a really intelligent question to ask you other than, what is the metaverse? Where is it going? Most people think this is, the metaverse is this one great big thing, but it's really all these little, So
Yeah.
just talk to me about the metaverse and what you think people need to know about it.
The way that I view the metaverse is that it's a convergence of our digital and physical selves manifested in virtual worlds that sort of seamlessly integrate with the physical world, right? It's not one discrete thing. It's not a single VR experience. It's not a single MMO game. It's a patchwork of all of these things that will create an omni experience for a user to express his or herself in these worlds over time, right? And identity, property rights, self-expression, gamified commerce will all exist in these virtual worlds. And one will seamlessly traverse it when we achieve metaverse, to use that phrase, right? And I think we will achieve metaverse when we stop saying it. It's sort of like how we used to announce that we would go online. You would say, hey, I'm going online, leave me alone. My modem is gonna sort of like ping and bounce around, and I'm gonna be online, and then I'll go offline and I'll interact with the real, quote unquote, real world again. We stopped saying it. Like, it would be weird if I took out my phone and said, I'm going online right now, excuse me. So I think once we stop saying metaverse, that's kind of like the signal that we have achieved it. And I think it's going to take time. It's gonna look more like human evolution of like sort of like swimming out of the ocean, growing 2 legs, standing upright, and becoming human, right? It's this undefined period of time that can take however long. I don't think one day we're just gonna say, oh, we have the metaverse. Like, people ask you, when will we have the metaverse? And I feel like anyone who puts a time on it is just missing sort of the grander picture. To say, oh, the metaverse will be here in 2 years. It's sort of like, I don't think there's gonna be a moment. It's gonna happen over time. I just rambled a little bit, but
No,
I hope I answered your
that
question.
was great. That was great.
Yeah.
And it saves me some time to try and stumble into a few stupid questions. But
Right.
let me ask you this: do you think part of that achieving the metaverse is also going to be demystifying this? Oh, that's the kid or the 40-year-old in the basement that's playing video games, and this is a VR thing, and that people are going to start to look at it. Well, what do you mean? I can go and look at the Da Vinci Codex at the Arm & Hammer Museum, and then I can go to Paris and see his paintings, and then I can go to another museum, all within one day. Or in a classroom, I don't have to get 50 kids in a bus and go, and all the other aspects beyond just gaming, because it seems like most people, the common man, thinks metaverse, gaming, VR.
Yeah, that's definitely the narrative that's in sort of the mainstream consciousness, is that the metaverse is VR and it's meant for games. But I think recreation, work, education, these are the sorts of things that will have killer use cases in, quote unquote, the metaverse. I think it'll be driven by UGC, user-generated content. Any metaverse worth living in, or any discrete virtual world worth living in, the amount of serendipity and content that will have to be inside those worlds is enormous, and it's more than any single studio could ever produce, or any patchwork of studios could produce. So I think, commerce, education, work, recreation, all of these things as manifested by a social layer, as manifested by UGC, is what will be needed for some sort of comprehensive metaverse that's worth living in. It's sort of like looking at the world as this is UGC. We created this, right? Like, no developer, I guess you could get into this philosophical idea about like God and things like that, but like, this is not, like, we're doing this, right? Like, this is UGC. And if the metaverse is like worth living in, we're going to have to be able to do things as mundane as giving an interview, or as sort of like sophisticated as, diagnosing the engine of a Boeing mid-flight from a VR simulator. So that's kind of my answer, I guess.
Okay, great. So my last question, because I know you're
Sorry,
here.
it's fine.
Can you just give me
We're
one more?
5:30, and then it's up to you.
Thank you. 30 seconds. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So if you have, and I'm coining some terms here, if what you're talking is Metaverse 1.0, is Metaverse 2.0 when AI starts creating room after room after room and it's not being developed?
Yeah,
by
I'm not, so I'm a technologist from a trend perspective, from a consumer behavior perspective. I'm not a technical person who spends his time dealing with AI and machine learning and stuff like that. So, I can hypothesize on it, but I don't think my answer would do it justice. I'm not qualified.